All right, we're ready.
Okay, ready for liftoff. Here we go. So if you can remember last Sunday, we talked about the feeding of the 5,000. And I concluded by letting you know there's three historical interpretations to that story, three historical explanations, if you will, about how that miracle was performed. And I encouraged you to read about it, do some research, and then we were going to open this Sunday with it. So before I get into it, I wanted to see if anyone, like good class students, you remembered to do that. I'm going to see if I see any hands anywhere.
There is a theory that the multiplication of the fishes and the loaves was called the miracle of sharing. And so instead of physically taking the loaves and the fish and creating new out of that everybody that brought food that day saw that there was a need to share. And so the multiplication of the sharing is what actually happened as part of the feeding of the 5,000 that day.
Okay, Jenny, yeah, that's exactly right. That's one of the historical beliefs or explanations of what happened. So thank you. Anyone else?
Ricky, it's Dora.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you a story that happened to us as I was growing up that to me makes one of the explanations kind of clear. We were at the ranch and my cousins came from Houston. And so there were about, 6 or 8 kids and my dad and my uncle. And we went out in the pickup and we were driving all around. And so my dad was an expert shot. And he saw some quail, which is when we had quail, and he shot a couple of them. Now, he shot them with 22 in the head. Yeah. So we decided, we were over in my uncle's piece of property, and we decided that, well, we wanted to eat those because they were just so small, there wasn't much there. But they decided to go ahead and cook them on a little fire. So we set up a little fire and cooked them. Used the salt out of the salt trough to salt them down and everything, and started peeling these pieces off. And the adults were very careful in passing the pieces around that everybody got a bite and everything. And surprisingly enough, all of us had plenty. So that's one of the interpretations, if I'm not mistaken, that how there's just almost a miracle involved in everybody being satisfied.
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Peter had a 22.
What was that?
Peter had a 22.
I see. Peter carried a 22 under his cloak at all times, huh? See, yeah, those disciples. Well, Peter was a feisty guy, so you never know. So anyone else? Yeah, that's good. I don't see any hands. Again, from my perspective, it's always hard for me to see the back half of the class. So don't let me miss anyone. Is there anyone else?
Go ahead.
Phyllis. Phyllis?
Ricky?
Yes.
Can't hear you, Ricky.
I can hear you.
I can hear you, Phyllis.
Did you turn your speaker on? Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I just don't have a problem with believing what the Bible said. The divinity of Jesus is so evident to me in the miracles that I just feel like in his miraculous way, he just divided that food and multiplied it all at the same time.
Well, there you go. And so let me go to the three historical ones, and I'm making this segue based on Phyllis's enthusiasm, because as I explain these three, all three camps, if you will, have equal enthusiasm for this explanation. The first one is what's called the sacramental, that miraculously Jesus just took a small portion of bread and fish and gave to everyone. And they were fed not physically, but spiritually. It was kind of a typology or a foreshadowing of communion. So that is their miraculous interpretation of it, the sacramental. Catholics lean very heavily on that. The second one is exactly what Janet was talking about, was sharing. When people saw that a little boy was willing to share his little bit of food, that supposedly everyone else then began to share their food. Everyone was thinking, oh, I only have enough for myself, but somehow as all the food was shared, there was enough for everyone. And then the third one is just called miraculous multiplication. It's what Phyllis was talking about, that Jesus took the loaves and the fish, the 5 and the 2, and they miraculously multiplied, that every time the disciples came back to him, he gave them more, and so forth. So the reason I want to bring these three up is that, number one, all three of these have been believed and taught for centuries. You can go back to the 4th century at least. Before, the first 2 centuries after Christ, there wasn't very many writings. 95% of the public was illiterate, so hardly anybody wrote. But after that, more and more people began to write. So these interpretations are not something that's just happened recently. Sometimes it's very easy for us to think, okay, if I stumble across a belief that's different from the one I have, it must be something liberal or heresy that's come in just the last 30 or 40 years. But this is an example how historically, again, for centuries, over a millennium and a half, there have been these 3 historic beliefs. Now, the second reason I want to bring these up is that they're still believed today, and the church didn't split over it. There was no new denominations over it. Nobody got ugly and fought over it. The church at that time just said, okay, there's room within us if you believe that Jesus did the miracle. If you're going to say, well, I believe he did it in a different way than you do, but I do believe that Jesus performed the miracle, there's room for that in the church. So I think that's one thing that needs to be emphasized today. There are certain flashpoints, whether they're political or theological, and we just want to take we take a piece of paper and rip it. We want to rip relationships or denominations. So anyway, just please keep that in mind as in the future. Any comments on that before I go on? Well, oh, come on, y'all making this too easy for me. Okay, so we'll go on to verse 45, and this is the story about Jesus walking on water. This is also found in the Gospels of Matthew and John. Verse 45, immediately after this would be the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus insisted. He didn't direct his disciples. He didn't tell them. He had to insist that his disciples get back into the boat. Now, why is that? So picture this. There's 5,000 men, women and children, easily 15,000, maybe 20,000 people. And there has been this great miracle. They've all been fed. And the Gospel of John, its account said, the people wanted to then take Jesus and make him king. They wanted to, if you will, lift him up on their shoulders or put him on a donkey or a horse. And this big crowd of people, we're going to go from village to Jerusalem and declare that he is the king. Well, can you imagine how the Romans would have reacted to that? The pushback, the bloodshed. And Jesus knew that was not the Father's way. That was not the Father's will. He didn't want his disciples to get caught up in this nationalistic outburst, if you will. So he said, you guys get in the boat, take off. And he instructed them to head across the lake to a town called Bethsaida. Now, Bethsaida is where Peter, Andrew, and Philip lived. That's where they came from. So that's a logical place for Jesus to send all the disciples. And so he sends them away while he sent the people home. Now I want to bring in one more thought here, and this is based on the account from the Gospel of Luke. It's the wilderness temptation. You remember that story? Jesus has the great 3 testings. In Luke's account, it ends by saying, when the devil had finished all this tempting, he left him until an opportune time. And I wonder, and I know I'm just speculating here, but was this one of those times when the human side of Jesus said, you know, maybe this is it? Was it another tempting or testing for him? Verse 46, after telling everyone goodbye, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Anytime that Jesus goes up into the hills to pray, we know that he's needing direction from the Father. He's got these nationalistic hotheads that are wanting to make him a military Messiah. He's got the religious authorities, the Jewish religious authorities that have, we can go back to chapter 3 and see they've already decided they're going to kill him. They're just looking for an opportune time. Herod Antipas has killed his cousin, John the Baptist. So Jesus, I'm sure, is watching over his shoulder. So he's got all this pressure on him. And so his direction, as ours should be, is to get apart and spend time from God, to set aside all these distractions, all these human pressures and problems, and get guidance from God. So all the guys, all the disciples are in the boat. They're headed westward across the Sea of Galilee. Jesus is going up in the hills. Picture that. And then verses 47 through 49. Late that night, the disciples were in their boat in the middle of the lake. And Jesus was alone on land. He saw that they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the winds and waves. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, Bill, why don't you take it from there? Bill can't hear you.
I said, so Ricky gave me the easy part. Jesus walked on water. Is there anybody in the class that's ever walked on water? I think over the generations, obviously, people asked 3 questions about this walking on water business, and that is, really, did he walk on water? 2, what did it mean, and why did he do it? I think Ricky has set us up pretty well in that, in fact, very well, in that there was this problem, as you see, when they had the feeding of the 5,000. That Jesus got the boys out of there because they were misguided. The boys and the crowd were wanting to make him a king, as Ricky said. But Jesus, he sent them ahead. We don't know why he sent them ahead. I guess we could speculate a whole lot of things. But one thing for sure, they had just seen the feeding of the 5,000. I didn't make a comment on it, Ricky, when you were talking about it, but I'll make a comment now. I don't suppose these fellows would have been willing to give their life for somebody that just had a bunch of people decide to share their food with one another. I wouldn't give my life to anybody that did that. But I think if somebody was able to turn this thing into a true miracle, miracle meaning something that does not happen naturally, I think I'd give my life for that. I like what Albert Schweitzer said. Probably some of you read that book of his, the great kind of a classic, The Quest for the Historical Jesus. Albert Schweitzer said there are always skeptical scholars. Skeptical scholars, he said, are people who look at the feeding of the 5,000 and claim that Jesus just made everybody happy, and that was a miracle. Any idiot can make everybody happy as long as he's a slick talker. And then Albert Schweitzer said, you know, these same skeptical scholars throughout all history have claimed that Jesus walking on the water was an optical illusion. They thought he was walking on the water, but he really wasn't walking on the water. Oh, really? He's out in the middle of one of the deepest lakes in the world. And he's gone out in the middle of a storm. I've been out in the middle of a storm on a place of water like that, and you can't see hardly anything when there's storms and waves and wind. And besides, they're out there. They're probably a couple miles from the shore. The Bible said Jesus saw them. How in the world did he see them? I'll tell you how he saw them. The same way he read John and James' his mind whenever they were thinking about being the first. Jesus is a miracle maker. Jesus can do things that nature doesn't tell us. So the first question is, did he really do it? Of course he did it. He didn't just create an illusion. And one other guy, Albert Schweitzer, said, some claim that Jesus was walking on a sandbar. Really? A sandbar in the Sea of Galilee? Has anybody been to the Sea of Galilee? There are no sandbars in the Sea of Galilee. Idiots can always come up with idiotic reasons. But the truth is, we can be nice with those people, and we should allow people to give their opinion. As Ricky said, we don't need a fuss over things like this. We just tell the truth and let reasonable people who believe in the Bible make their own decisions and be nice to them. Can't you be nice to people who are kind of kooky? Well, sure you can. And people who have very convincing arguments, we can be nice to them, but we need to stand up and tell what we think is the truth. But I was going on to say, not only do we know that he really did it because the Bible says so, but the fact is, I love what my old professor John Newport used to say, anybody who believes in the resurrection, that is, anybody who believes that Jesus could be dead, buried for 3 days to the point he's already decomposing, and he can come back alive again, anybody who can believe in the resurrection, all the rest of the miracles are snapped. I love that. I've leaned on that all my life. I believe that Jesus rose from the dead because the whole New Testament is about men and women who gave their lives because they believed that Jesus rose from the dead. They didn't see it. They heard these people give record of it. And as Ricky said, not all of them wrote it down. Many of them just told everybody about it. But I believe in the resurrection. So the rest of these miracles, to me, are very simple. Jesus walked on the water. And you know what it says? Of course, some people don't believe the Bible, but I do. The Bible says, listen, in Matthew, the way he recorded this, he said, when the men saw what Jesus had done walking on the water, they said, surely he was the Son of God. And they fell down and worshiped him. And then they said to him, truly, you are the Son of God. People don't just say that unless they believe a miracle has happened in front of them. The second question that we ought to ask about this is, what did it mean? Why did Jesus walk on water? I mean, nobody had been walking on water in those days. Why did he do it? What did it mean? I think it's three things I'll say quickly, Ricky. One, he did it to remind them and to remind us that he is God in flesh. He's the God-man. We need to constantly be reminded that Jesus was and is God, and we cannot understand how a physical man can also be the spiritual God. We don't have to understand it. We have to believe it. and I believe it by faith. Matthew reminded us of this because the way he recounted it, do y'all remember what he said? Matthew said it this way: when the men were crying out because they were scared to death, they thought they'd seen a spooky ghost. Jesus said, get this, fear not. Maya. Maya. You know what that means? That means I am here. You know what he was doing? Jesus was saying the same thing that God said to Moses. When Moses said, what am I to tell these people when I go to them? They're not going to believe me. God said to Moses, tell them that Maya sent you. That means I am sent you. Here's another way to translate that, saying I am, the great I am, the one who is the source of everything, the one who created everything, the one who created you, the one who is the creator of every single thing. That's who I am. And I'm sure these fellows got it because they knew the Old Testament and he knew he was quoting God himself. So the first thing he wanted these guys to remember is that he was now saying, you're right, I am God in flesh. You know, I think the lesson that we can learn from this is that we need to be careful not to get so caught up in what he does for us that we forget who he is, who's doing it. We can be so thankful for the things that we forget to be thankful for who he is and his presence with us. These guys were being taught by Jesus, remember who I am. And when I'm gone, still remember who I am. I am God in spirit. I am with you, just like when you're struggling in the water out there. And I came to you when it seemed impossible. Second thing, the reason he walked on water is because he wanted to remind us that he created nature. He was not limited by nature. I think it's important for us today, especially in our technological society. It's important. I find it difficult sometimes. I've been studying up on this AI because I think some of you wanted to have some lessons on artificial intelligence. And you know, this whole thing of science has always been, for some people, something that caused them to want to explain away God, explain away miracles, explain away the Bible. But for many of us, the more we learn about technology, I like what Dale Klein says. The more I learn, the more science I learn, the more physics, the more nuclear, the more atoms, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. That God is so much bigger and faith is so much more important. What these guys learn, and that we should not limit God by our own limitations. Just because we don't know how a motor works, we don't have to stop getting in the car. Because we don't understand, I don't understand how electricity works, but I still turn on the light. So he wanted these guys to know that he was over nature. He could do anything when he wanted. And the last thing I think he was trying to remind them of, that he knows and can meet their every need, no matter how impossible it seems. Jesus walking on the water, being able to see them out there in the middle of the water in the storm, shows us that he had an eye on them, just like he does with us. Well, what a great thing I think that walking on the water says to me. It says, even when I'm in my worst shape, he knows, he hadn't forgot. We can be so distracted by our problems that we forget that he is aware of our problems and he's going to do what's best for us. Well, that's enough, Ricky.
Okay, Bill, thank you. That's wonderful. Always. That's great. Well, let's pick up the story then, verses 51 and 52. Then he climbed into the boat. So let me stop there. Consider this. This is the second time these disciples have been in a storm. The first one was back in chapter 4. You remember that Jesus is in the back of the boat and he's sleeping. In the first storm, Jesus is with them. In this second storm, he is not. So it's not just a repeat of the same test. This is a greater test. And I think there's a principle here that applies to our journey of discipleship. We'd like to think that once we pass the test, well, we can check that box and then we can just move on to greater spiritual maturity. But there are greater tests in our life. I would like to think that the more you walk with Jesus, the easier the tests get. But maybe I'm the only one, but it seems like they get harder.
Yeah.
It seems like the expectations grow. And nobody told me that when I first became a Christian. But that's one of those things we need to know, that as those tests increase, as our journey increases in time, it's not a lack of faith. We're not going backwards. It's just part of our relationship with God. God wants our relationship with him to grow, and that means our faith must grow. And faith comes as we obey and go through those tests of life. They climbed into the boat. They were totally amazed, for they still didn't understand the significance of the miracle of the loaves. And why? Because their hearts were too hard to take it in. So these disciples have hard hearts. They're not hard because of bitterness or envy or unforgiveness, but they're hard spiritually speaking. It's almost like we can go back to the parable of the good soil. That soil in that part of their life is not receptive. It's hard soil. So my question that I wanted y'all to prepare for, and I want us to discuss right now, what causes our hearts to be spiritually hard? What keeps us from being spiritually receptive? Okay, not everyone at once.
Ricky, sometimes I remembering a time that I went through, I remember that I was afraid of being hurt more. It was a time that I had been hurt and I was afraid of being hurt more. So I hardened my heart so I wouldn't feel, i.e., when I went to church, I would sit there, but I would not necessarily allow myself to take in what was being said and
Okay.
feel it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That definitely can happen, when we let the circumstances of life or maybe our concept of God harden our heart.
Ricky, this is Roger.
Okay, Roger.
I think for me personally, when I have had to face the fact that my heart had gotten hard about some issue, was because for me, it was because I let the cares of the world become number one priority in my life. And this is a recurring problem because it is difficult to not get caught up in the world over and over again. The cares of the world or the cares of my family or things, but all of these are major distractions, and they have the result of being cirrhosis of the heart.
That is an excellent way to put it, cirrhosis of the heart. Who else?
Ricky, this is Charlie.
Okay.
Two people, both of them praying for the same thing. One person, their prayers are answered. The other person isn't. Their hearts get hardened because they don't understand why God didn't answer their prayers like their friend did. To me, and I've seen that with people telling me, well, I prayed for my mom and she died. Yet my friend her mom was going through cancer too. And she let live. Said, you know, why doesn't God love me anymore? So it's not understanding God like that.
Yeah, Charlie, that does happen a lot. We seem to hear all the great stories about someone being healed or the cancer going into remission. But then we don't hear the stories about when that didn't happen. And I can think of many times when that caused someone to, as the Bible says, fall away. When they fall out of community, out of relationship with their Christian friends. And that is hard. That is really, really hard. Someone else?
Ricky, for me personally, whoop. That's one of that's one of our members trying to call in. Okay, I just tell him to wait. Let's see if I can get Ricky back. I don't know where Ricky is. Anyway, I was going to say for me, hardening happens because of selfishness, because I get to thinking things ought to be done my way. And I don't know, I think probably when I don't get my way, I get hard. I guess it kind of causes all soft things to go hard. Pride. Sounds like that's what Pharaoh's problems was. He wanted things to go his way. And I guess the more and more these difficulties in life have hit me, I know Charlie and I have talked about this, the more these difficulties hit you, it's kind of like a tenderizer. They keep beating on you, you get more tender, and you start saying, God, whatever you want, I'm okay with it. So maybe some of us need some of the hard stuff to soften us up.
Mm-hmm. Bill, as you're saying that, I'm reminded of the old expression that when people go through difficult times, they either get better or they get bitter.
Yes.
And so it's our choice. And to get better, we have to continue to trust God. We have to continue to believe that God's going to take care of us, even if it's in a way that we wouldn't have chosen or thought. Or anyway, it is always a journey of faith. Anyone else? Imagine now you're a disciple. One of Jesus's 12 disciples. You're with him every day. You've seen all these healings and deliverance from demons and feeding of the multitudes and these wonderful, fabulous, incredible teaching to new understanding about God. And your heart's still hard? How does that happen? How could that happen today? Phyllis?
If you think about these guys who've been following Jesus around for quite a while now, I think they were still having to deal with their expectations of what the Messiah was going to be and do. And Jesus didn't meet their expectations. And they had to readjust their thinking to see how much more he was bringing to them, rather than just freedom from the Romans. So I think our expectations of how God ought to be and act get in our way sometime.
I think that is a marvelous way to put it. I think every one of us still has that problem. We have a concept, because we're human, we're not God. There's no way we can conceive of God as God really is. We're limited. And so part of our journey of discipleship is peeling off, throwing away those concepts that are really not accurate. They may not be great big things. It may be smaller things where we kind of have to fine tune or tweak our understanding of God. So anyway, that's Phyllis, that's really good. Anyone else? There's a lot of bright minds out there I'm looking at. Okay, I'm gonna have to start calling on people next Sunday, I guess.
Ricky, it's
Oh, yeah,
Blanche.
Blanche.
Yes. Many years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer, had to go to surgery. And as I was going into surgery, my prayer was not, Lord, heal me, take this away. I prayed, I said, God, you said you would always be with me. So now you have to hold my hand. That was my prayer. And this was maybe 30 years ago, and I'm still here. But ever since, anytime something has come up physically or otherwise, I just lost my brother recently. Again, I say, just be with me. Show me how to live through this and be myself and continue serving you. That's my prayer, not for necessarily for healing. We would love to pray for healing and expect healing, but my prayer is, Lord, be with me so that I can go through this. And he still is.
Well, Blanche, that is very touching and very mature. I'm gonna save that. Remember that. Yes, that is great.
Ricky, this is Roger. I wonder in this class if anyone thinks their heart has never been hardened.
Oh.
Well, that's a good one, because if everybody's honest, then everybody's got something to share right now, don't they?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, Roger, I'll let you talk to the class after we stop the recording. That's great. Okay, let's see. We're getting kind of close to the end. I think just a few more verses. And so now we get to verses 53 through 56. After they had crossed the lake, they landed at Gennesaret. Gennesaret is both a region and a town that's very close to Bethsaida, again on the west side, the Jewish side of the Sea of Galilee. They brought the boat to shore and climbed out. And so I picture now these disciples, all that they've been through in just the last few hours, the feeding of the 5,000, the big storm. Jesus comes walking to them on the water. They think he's a ghost, but then he climbs into the boat. Now the winds dissipate, the waves get flat as a table. And now they get across the other shore. They're about to take a deep breath, and oh my gosh, here comes another crowd. Don't you know? They're thinking, what is going to happen now? And so the people recognize Jesus at once. And this was very touching to me, because here's their reaction. They recognized Jesus, and they ran throughout the whole area, carrying sick people on mats to wherever they heard he was. So once again, people recognize Jesus. They say, oh, there's that person I've heard about who heals. So once again, we're going to have this mass of people, hundreds of people, come to Jesus for what they can get. It dawned on me as I was reading this account, here is story after story, crowd after crowd, thousands of people now who have seen Jesus at work. They've been touched by his lives, and none of them have chosen to follow him. None of them have recognized him as at least maybe a great prophet or the Messiah. And so to me, this is a picture about how when people are really in need, they come to God, and maybe that need's met, and then they go away. It's like they know him, in other words, to recognize, but nobody really knows him. They really don't know who he is. The people recognized Jesus at once, and they ran throughout the whole area, carrying sick people on mats to wherever they heard he was. And then verse 6, wherever he went, in villages, cities, or on the countryside, they brought the sick out to the marketplaces. They begged him to let the sick touch at least the fringe of his robe. In other words, you have people who've been carried and they don't want to keep carrying him, trying to follow Jesus. So they set these sick people down, or maybe they're on a mat. And so Jesus just passes by. The fringe would be, Jesus wears like a mantle that goes like, it's almost like a shawl, but it's has religious importance. And there are fringes or tassels at the very bottom to remind the Jewish man about the importance of the law and to pray. And all who touched him were healed. So again, Jesus has done another miracle, just one right after the other. So next would come chapter 7, and it's a big change in the movie. Up to now, we've seen miracle after miracle. Now, in chapter 7, Jesus is going to have a very revolutionary teaching. So I'm just going to leave it at this. I always like for church to end about 5 minutes early. I felt like maybe we'd all done our job a little bit better. So we're going to get out of Sunday school a little earlier. So make sure you read chapter 7.
I'm going to say something.
Oh, Phyllis? Okay.
I just wanted to say, y'all know I'm pretty simple-minded about things. And when I look at these stories, they're all just kind of summed up in 3 words. Jesus shows up. When the people were hungry for spiritual nourishment or food, Jesus showed up. When the disciples were scared, Jesus showed up. And when these people needed healing, Jesus showed up. And the best news is, he's still showing up.
Amen. That's great. So let me sum that up then by saying for Jesus to still show up today, he's got to work through people who are willing to let that happen. Ralph?
Thank you, Ricky. In my NIV version, Ricky, on verse 48, it says the disciples were straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass them by. But when they saw him walking in the water, they thought he was a ghost. So that he was about to pass them by. I don't know why it caught my attention this morning. It was like he was going somewhere else. Or
would you like for me to comment on that?
That's why, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So it says he intended to go past them. I think some of the best translations say he intended to pass them by. And so if we understand what that means, let's see, like at Mount Sinai, God passed by Moses to show his glory. And then there's an incident on Mount Horeb where God passed by Elijah to show his power. So it does not mean that Jesus said, okay, you guys are on your own. It means he's going to pass by to show them something very important about himself. And this is exactly what Bill was talking about earlier. What he was going to show them is this, or teach them is this. In verse 50, they were all terrified when they saw him, but Jesus spoke to them at once. Don't be afraid, he said. Take courage. I am here. That's the way it reads in the NLT. In the Greek, it says, I am is here. Oh, no, wait, I said that wrong. It literally says, I am. And so if you're trying to turn that into good grammar, it'd be, I am is here. But the I am is what Bill was talking about. It's those two Greek words. It's the same words that God used when speaking to Moses at the burning bush. So Jesus passes by. He's going to show them his glory, his nature, his character, who he really is. And so what Jesus is telling them, and I don't think they fully grasped it then, but he is saying, I am God. Now, probably everybody listen to me is a Christian. We say, okay, that's fine. I know that. But think about these good Jewish boys. Since they were 2 years old or younger, what were they taught? Deuteronomy chapter 6. The Lord your God is one. Okay. They were taught that there's one God, and that God is out there somewhere. And now Jesus is saying, I am God. And so these good monotheistic believing Jews are trying to wrap their mind around that. How can God be out there and God be right here? I thought, God was in heaven. Now Jesus is saying he is God. And so sometimes we're hard on the disciples. We're thinking they're a little dumb, a little slow. Man, if I'd been there, I'd have picked it up immediately. I tell you, remember Jesus, one of the primary reasons Jesus came was to clarify people's understanding about God. And here he's trying to help them. They were expecting a Messiah, but a Messiah like David, one who'd be a kind of a super duper human being, strong and brilliant and very charismatic. And now here's one who's incarnate, God in a human body. And so they're having to change the way they think about all this. And now hold that thought, because when we get to chapter 7, it's going to become intensified. Ralph?
Thank you. Thank you, Ricky. Appreciate that. I'll stand here before you this morning convicted by what Roger said. So, all of you know me for a long time. I really do not like coming to church without my wife. And last night she started complaining about these migraine headaches that she'd had since midweek and been bothering her. And so last night I knew that this morning there was a little chance that she wasn't going to get up and come to church. I get up fairly early, and then she's like, "Will you wake me up, before 8?" Well, I walk in and she's dead to the world, and she's got a heating pad around her head, and I am aggravated. My heart is hardened, because I know she's not coming. I know, Elaine, I know. And I just said this morning, anybody's room, well, here I'm sitting right here, and so I thank you for that reminder. Since you're a text thing, hope you're feeling better. I love you. I'll see you tonight. Thank you, brother. For it. That's what we do is gospel, right? That's why we're here together. And we appreciate the lessons, as well. So I appreciate that. And then Ricky, I really appreciate your thought about there's always been things that we're might slightly disagree about, the interpretation of the 5,000. There's room in the church. There's room amongst believers to disagree.
Amen.
And that is very heartening to me. We're going to have that opportunity. Okay, we're going to have an opportunity to prove that in the next year or two in our faith. So let's just remember that. All right, let's remember that. So, all right, announcements. Anyone else? Good, Karen, happy birthday. Again, appreciate you, Eli. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank
y'all. No one believes you're 33. Okay, but there you go again, Roger, my heart hardened. Okay, I'm sure he's telling the truth, Brother Greg, we hope your schedule allows you to keep coming back to join us. We miss you and we love you. And so we will see everybody next week. Blatchford, are you still battling COVID?
We are well. We are out of quarantine and all. We had company that let us know Friday that they were coming to visit today, and we were at the ranch. So we had to clean house there, and we've had to clean house here.
We're glad to hear you're back amongst the healthy. So we'll see you all soon. All right, everybody have a great week. God bless.
Thank you.
See you next time. Thanks again. Rick.
Bye-bye.
Have a blessed week. Thank you. Have a good week. Thank you. Thank you.